The silk was a whisper of a lie against her skin. It was a cold, heavy caress, the color of cream, and just as rich, meant to make her look like a bride. Clara felt more like a sacrifice. The dress was a size too small, the delicate seams straining across her hips and the soft flesh of her upper arms. The woman fitting it, a severe figure with pins in her mouth, made a noise of disapproval. Clara ignored her. She focused on the window, on the slice of gray New York sky visible between two towering buildings of glass and steel. This was the last piece of her old world she would see. Her father's debt was a number with too many zeros to feel real. It had been an abstract terror, a shadow that lived at their dinner table. Now it had a face. Or it would soon. They had told her his name was Dante Moretti. The name felt like a bruise. She was the payment, the final ledger entry to close the account. Marry the man, and the debt was erased. Refuse, and her father would disappear into the trunk of a car. There was no choice. However, the man she was about to meet was not the man she had pictured. She had imagined a monster of mythic proportions, a bull of a man with cruel hands and a predator's smile. The reality was something far quieter and infinitely more dangerous. And now she could not leave. The ceremony was not held in a church. It took place in a sterile office on the top floor of a skyscraper that scraped the clouds. There was no priest, only a lawyer with tired eyes and a pen. Clara stood beside her father, who refused to meet her gaze. He looked smaller than she had ever seen him, a man hollowed out by his own mistakes. Then, the door opened. Two men in dark suits entered first, their gazes sweeping the room with a professional emptiness that was more chilling than any open threat. Between them, another man followed, and the air in the room grew thin and cold. It was Dante Moretti. He was not the bull she had imagined. He moved with an unnatural stillness, his upper body held with rigid control. Because he was not walking. He was in a wheelchair, his long legs inert beneath a cashmere blanket. The chair was a weapon of modern engineering, black and chrome, moving without a sound across the marble floor. His face was carved from stone, all harsh angles and unforgiving lines. Dark hair was brushed back from a high forehead, and his eyes, the color of storm clouds, missed nothing. He wore a suit of impossible quality, a charcoal wool that fit his broad shoulders perfectly. On the little finger of his left hand, a heavy gold signet ring was the only ornament. His hands rested on the arms of the chair, perfectly still, but she could see the strength in them, the latent power in the corded muscles of his forearms. He did not look at her. His attention was on her father. "Is it done?" His voice was a low rasp, like stones grinding together. It was the voice of a man who was not used to repeating himself. "Yes, Mr. Moretti," the lawyer said, pushing a document across the polished desk. "She just needs to sign." Clara felt her father's hand on her back, a weak, trembling push. She stepped forward. The scent of him reached her first. Not cologne, but something cleaner, sharper. Sandalwood and the faint, metallic tang of ozone, like the air after a lightning strike. She picked up the pen. Her hand did not shake. She would not give him that. She signed her name, Clara Rossi, for the last time. The ink was black and final. Dante Moretti finally turned his head, and his eyes landed on her. It was not a look of desire, or even interest. It was the look of a man appraising an asset. He took in the too-tight dress, her full figure, the defiant set of her jaw. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his gaze, and then it was gone. "Take her to the car," he said to one of his men. He had not spoken a single word to her. The penthouse was a palace of glass and silence. It occupied the entire top 2 floors, with views that stretched from the Hudson to the East River. The furniture was minimalist and brutal, all sharp lines and cold materials. It felt less like a home and more like a fortress. Her new prison. For the first week, she was a ghost. Dante was a constant, unnerving presence. He worked from a sprawling office with a desk of polished obsidian, taking meetings with men who entered with deference and left with fear in their eyes. He never raised his voice. He never had to. His power was in his stillness, in the unnerving weight of his silence. He commanded his empire from a throne of black leather and steel. He ate his meals alone. A housekeeper, a silent woman named Sophia, would bring Clara a tray in her room. The room was beautiful, with a bed the size of a small country and a bathroom clad in floor-to-ceiling marble. It was also locked from the outside at night. Clara spent her days exploring the cage. She discovered a library filled with first editions, a gym she was sure he could not use, and a glassed-in terrace with a single, lonely olive tree. She read the books. She traced the spines. She tried not to think about the fact that every beautiful object was a bar in her cell. She learned his routine. He woke before the sun, and she would hear the whisper of his chair in the hall. He would be in the gym, not on the machines, but with a physical therapist, a grim-faced man who put him through a punishing regimen of stretches and resistance training for his upper body. She watched once, from the crack in the doorway. The sheer, brutal effort on Dante's face, the sweat beading on his temples as he fought against his own uncooperative body, was the first human thing she had seen in him. It was a crack in the marble facade. One evening, unable to sleep, she wandered into the darkened living room. The city lights glittered below like a fallen constellation. She heard a sound from his office. A glass shattering. She froze. It was the first uncontrolled sound she had ever heard him make. Driven by a curiosity that outweighed her fear, she crept to the doorway. Dante was there, his back to her. A broken whiskey tumbler lay on the floor. On his desk, propped against a lamp, was a framed photograph. He was staring at it, his shoulders rigid with a tension that seemed to vibrate through the room. Quietly, she began to back away. But the floorboard beneath her foot gave a soft creak. His head snapped around. In the dim light, his face was a mask of raw anguish, an expression so naked and savage it stole the air from her lungs. It was gone in a second, replaced by his usual cold fury. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his voice a low snarl. "I heard a noise," she said, her own voice surprisingly steady. His eyes narrowed, pinning her in place. "Get out." She should have. She should have run back to her room and locked the door. But she saw the photograph. It was of two young men, arms slung around each other, laughing into the camera. One was a younger Dante, standing tall and whole. The other looked like him, but his smile was wider, easier. An older brother, she guessed. That was the moment everything changed. She saw the source of the ice in his veins. It was not cruelty. It was grief, sealed over and frozen solid. She did not leave. Instead, she walked to the small bar in the corner, took out a fresh glass, and placed it on the corner of his desk, well within his reach. She did not say a word. She met his stunned, furious gaze for a single, charged beat. Then she turned and walked away, the silence she left behind heavier than any sound. She would think about that later, about the way his eyes had followed her, not with contempt, but with a dawning, grudging confusion. She had not acted like a prisoner. She had acted like an equal. A week after the incident with the broken glass, things began to shift. It was subtle. Sophia, the housekeeper, started leaving the door to her room unlocked at night. One morning, a stack of newspapers and a cup of coffee were waiting for her on the kitchen island. Small gestures, but in this silent house, they were seismic. Dante still did not speak to her, but she felt his eyes on her more often. When she sat in the library reading, she would feel a prickling on her skin and look up to find him paused in the doorway, his expression unreadable, before he moved on. He was watching her, studying her. The threat that had always been a distant hum grew louder. The Falcone family. She heard the name whispered in tense phone calls Dante took in his office. They were old rivals, the ones responsible for the ambush that had taken his brother, Marco, and his legs. Now, with rumors of Dante's weakened state, they were getting bold. One afternoon, Clara was returning from a walk she was now permitted to take with one of Dante's guards, a stoic man named Luca. As they entered the private garage beneath the building, a black sedan screeched around the corner, blocking their exit. Two men with hard faces and guns got out. Luca shoved her behind him instantly, his own weapon appearing in his hand. "Get back to the elevator," he yelled. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs, but her feet felt rooted to the concrete. This was it. The violence she knew was the foundation of this world, made real. The men were advancing, shouting something at Luca. They weren't here for him. They were here for her. A message to Dante. She had a choice. The emergency exit was 10 feet to her left. She could run, disappear into the city, and never look back. The thought was a dizzying rush of possibility. Freedom. But then she saw Luca's face, pale and tight with strain. He was loyal.
He would die for Dante.
He would die for her, the woman who was nothing more than a piece of property. And she thought of Dante, alone upstairs, his empire and his life balanced on the edge of a knife, his only vulnerability the grief for the brother he had failed to protect. She did not run. Instead, she did the only thing she could think of. She screamed. Not a scream of terror, but a raw, furious bellow of outrage. At the same time, she grabbed the hefty fire extinguisher mounted on the wall, twisted the pin, and aimed the nozzle at the attackers. A thick cloud of white chemical foam blasted out, engulfing them. They cursed, blinded and choking. It was the opening Luca needed. He fired twice. The shots were deafening in the enclosed space. One of the men went down. The other scrambled back into the car, which tore out of the garage with a squeal of tires. Silence descended, thick with the smell of cordite and chemical dust. Luca stood over the downed man, his gun steady. He looked back at Clara, who was still holding the empty extinguisher, her knuckles white. Her whole body was trembling, but she met his gaze without flinching. Therefore, when Dante came down, his face a thundercloud, he found a scene he did not expect. He saw the downed gunman, the foam coating the concrete, and Clara, standing her ground beside his soldier, covered in white dust but unbroken. Luca gave his report, his voice clipped and precise. He did not embellish, but he did not need to. The facts spoke for themselves. She could have run. She stayed. She acted. Dante wheeled himself closer, his eyes scanning the scene. He stopped in front of Clara. The silence stretched, taut and heavy. She expected him to be angry, to rebuke her for her recklessness. He looked at the extinguisher in her hands. He looked at her face, smudged with white powder. Then he looked directly into her eyes. "Clara," he said. It was the first time he had used her name, and the way he said it was different. It was not a label. It was a recognition. He reached out, and his fingers brushed a smudge of dust from her cheek. His touch was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a jolt through her, a current of heat that had nothing to do with fear.
Come upstairs.
The aftermath of the garage attack settled a new kind of quiet over the penthouse. It was not the empty silence of before, but a watchful, charged stillness. Dante had his men double the security, and the hushed, urgent conversations behind his office door became more frequent. Clara knew she was the reason. The Falcones had shown their hand. They saw her not as a wife, but as leverage. Dante began to include her. Not in his business, not directly. But he would eat his dinner at the large dining table now, instead of in his study, and expect her to be there. They ate in silence, but it was a shared silence. He would watch her, his gaze intense, as if trying to solve a complex puzzle. He was trying to understand why she had not run. He started leaving financial ledgers on the coffee table in the living room. They were for his legitimate businesses, a string of restaurants and import companies.
She knew it was a test.
Her father had been a bookkeeper before his gambling addiction ruined him. She had inherited his head for numbers. One evening, she picked one up. She found a subtle discrepancy, a pattern of invoicing that looked like a ghost employee was siphoning funds. She circled the entries with a pen and left the ledger on his desk without a word. The next day, one of his capos, a man named Russo, was summoned to the office. Clara did not hear what was said, but Russo left with a sheen of cold sweat on his brow, his face the color of ash. He was never seen at the penthouse again. Dante never mentioned it, but that night at dinner, he pushed a small, velvet box across the table toward her. Inside was a simple, elegant bracelet of white gold. It was not a gift. It was a payment, acknowledgement of a service rendered. She fastened it around her wrist. The cold metal felt like a manacle and a crown all at once. Her proximity to his operations gave her a clearer picture of the man. She learned the true, brutal nature of his justice. He was not just a businessman. He was a king who ruled a dark, violent kingdom. She read the reports his security chief left for him, detailing the fates of his enemies. The descriptions were stark, clinical, and horrifying. This knowledge should have made her run. It should have filled her with revulsion. Instead, it filled her with a terrible, clear-eyed understanding. In this world, the one the Falcons inhabited, this was the only language that guaranteed survival. The Falcons, enraged by their failed abduction attempt, grew desperate. They decided to bring the war to him. It happened late one night. A sudden, jarring explosion from the lower floors shook the entire building. The power cut out, plunging the penthouse into an emergency-lit darkness. Alarms blared. Dante's men were in motion instantly, Luca appearing at his side. "They've breached the lobby," Luca said, his voice grim. "They're coming up the service stairs." Dante's face was calm, but his eyes were chips of ice. "Get to the safe room." The safe room was a reinforced panic room hidden behind a bookshelf in the library. But the attackers were moving too fast. Gunshots echoed from the floor below. They were already on their level. "They've cut us off," Luca said, pressing his ear to his radio. Two of Dante's guards fell back into the living room, taking cover behind the heavy furniture. Gunfire erupted, shattering the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city lights, once a beautiful backdrop, now made them perfect silhouettes. Dante was the most vulnerable. Trapped in his chair, he was a stationary target. Luca and another guard provided covering fire, but they were outnumbered. A bullet ricocheted off the wall near Dante's head, showering him with plaster dust. In that moment, watching him, so powerful and yet so physically helpless, Clara felt a surge of something fierce and protective. This man was her jailer, the architect of her fate. But he was also the only thing standing between her and a world that would chew her up and spit her out. She had to do something. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for a weapon and advantage. She saw it on the bar, a row of expensive liquor bottles. She grabbed the oldest, heaviest bottle of scotch she could find. One of the attackers was trying to flank them, using the chaos to creep along the far wall. He was focused on Luca, his rifle raised. He did not see her. Clara did not hesitate. She moved with a speed she did not know she possessed, her body, which she had so often cursed for being too big, too slow, becoming a shield. She ran at the man, putting all her weight behind it, and brought the heavy bottle down on the side of his head. The impact was a sickening crack. The man crumpled to the floor without a sound. She stood over him, her chest heaving, the neck of the broken bottle clutched in her hand. She had crossed a line. She had met this world's violence with her own. And she did not regret it. The tide of the firefight turned. With one attacker down, Dante's men were able to regain control. The remaining intruders were neutralized or driven back. Silence fell, broken only by the tinkling of broken glass and the distant wail of sirens. Luca checked on her, his eyes wide with a new kind of respect. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. She let the broken bottle fall from her numb fingers. Dante wheeled himself over to her. There was a shallow graze on his temple, a thin line of blood trickling down his stone-carved cheek. He looked from the unconscious man on the floor to her. He reached out and gripped her wrist, his fingers wrapping around the cool metal of the bracelet he had given her. His grip was like iron. "You should have run," he whispered, his voice rough. "You should have saved yourself." She met his gaze, her own eyes blazing. "There was nowhere to run," she said, her voice clear and strong. "This is my home now." It was not a declaration of love. It was a statement of fact, a confession of allegiance. He held her gaze, and in the depths of his storm-gray eyes, she saw the ice begin to crack. He saw her, truly saw her, not as a debt, not as a victim, but as a survivor, as his equal. But her act of violence, her choice to fight, had a cost she did not expect. One of the attackers had escaped, and he had seen her face. Now the Falcons knew. The quiet, unassuming wife was not a weakness to be exploited. She was a queen to be removed from the board. The war was no longer just his. It was theirs. The attack on the penthouse changed everything. The Falcons now knew Clara was not a pawn. Dante knew she was a queen. The invisible walls between them crumbled, replaced by a shared, unspoken purpose. He began speaking to her about his strategies, not seeking her permission, but laying out the facts as he would to his underboss. He valued her mind, her ability to see patterns others missed. She had a cold, clear logic that mirrored his own. He told her about Marco. He spoke of the ambush, the betrayal from within by a capo their father had trusted. Dante had been driving. Marco had bled out in the seat next to him while Dante lay on the pavement, unable to move, unable to help. The guilt was a poison he had been drinking every day for 5 years. "I have killed every man responsible," he told her one night, his voice devoid of emotion as they sat on the terrace overlooking the city. "Except for one. Antonio Falcone. He planned it. He gave the order. And he will pay. He will come for me again," Clara stated. It was not a question. "Yes," Dante said. "He thinks you are my only weakness. He does not understand that you are my greatest strength." The admission hung in the air between them, more intimate than any physical touch. The final confrontation came sooner than they expected. The Falcons, desperate and losing ground as Dante systematically dismantled their operations, made their last move. They did not come with guns. They came with a lie. A message was delivered to Clara. It was from her father. He was in trouble. He was sick. He needed to see her. A location was given, a small Italian cafe in her old neighborhood. She knew it was a trap. Her father would never have the courage to contact her. She showed the message to Dante. His face hardened. "It's Falcone." "I know," she said. "I'm going." "No," he said, his voice absolute. "It's too dangerous." "It's the only way," she countered, her voice calm and firm. "He wants me. He's expecting me to be afraid. He's expecting you to lock me away. We will give him what he wants, but on our terms." She laid out her plan. It was audacious, risky, and relied entirely on Antonio Falcone's arrogance. Dante listened, his eyes never leaving her face. When she was finished, he was silent for a long moment. He saw the steel in her, the same unbending will that lived in him. "Luca and his team will be everywhere," he finally said. It was not a question. It was his consent. Clara walked into the cafe alone. The place was almost empty. Antonio Falcone sat at a table in the back, a portly man with a cruel mouth and small, piggish eyes. He smiled when he saw her. "I am so glad you could make it," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. She sat. She did not look afraid. She looked annoyed. "Let's get this over with, Antonio. You didn't really think this would work, did you?" His smile faltered. "You have a mouth on you. Dante likes that, does he? A pity. He can't do much else." Clara leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "That's why I'm here. Do you have any idea what it's like being married to him? Trapped in that apartment? He's a broken man. His entire empire is crumbling, and he's too proud to see it." Falcone stared at her, a flicker of greedy interest in his eyes. This was what he wanted to believe. "He's vulnerable," Clara continued, her words weaving a careful web. "His most trusted man, Luca, is a fool. And his finances. He's bleeding money. I have his server passwords. All of his accounts, his offshore holdings, his entire network. I want out. And I want to be paid for my trouble." It was the perfect bait. It played to his ego, his greed, and his hatred for Dante. He believed her, because he wanted to. "The passwords," he demanded, leaning closer. "Not here," she said, glancing around nervously. "Give me a secure laptop. I'll give you everything. In exchange, you get me out of the country and give me 10% of what you take." His eyes gleamed. He snapped his fingers, and one of his men brought over a laptop. Do it.
Now.
Clara opened the laptop. She began to type. But she was not typing passwords. She was activating a program Dante's tech expert had installed. It triggered a silent alarm, pinpointed their exact location to Luca's team, and, most importantly, began uploading a virus that would wipe Falcone's entire system, which he was foolishly running on the same encrypted network. It's taking a moment, she said, stalling. It's heavily encrypted. Falcone was growing impatient. Hurry up. That's when the doors to the cafe burst open. Luca and his men flooded in, weapons raised. Falcone's men were hopelessly outmatched. It was over in seconds. Falcone stared at Clara, his face a mask of disbelief and fury. You, he sputtered. Clara closed the laptop and pushed it back across the table. She stood up, her expression cold as ice. He is not the broken one, Antonio. You are. Back in the penthouse, the silence was different. It was the calm after a storm, the quiet of a victory that had been earned at great cost. Dante was waiting for her by the window. He turned his chair as she entered. He did not speak, just watched her walk toward him. She stopped in front of him. The war was over. The debt that had brought her here was a distant memory. She had done what she had been brought here to do, and more. The debt is paid, Dante said, his voice quiet. He was echoing the thought in her head. Falcone is finished. You are free to go, Clara. I will give you anything you need. A new life, anywhere you want. It was the ultimate test. He was giving her back the choice that had been stolen from her. She looked at him, this man of iron and ice, who ruled a kingdom from a wheelchair. She looked at the city lights glittering behind him, a world that was no longer just his, but theirs. She could leave. She could walk out that door and reclaim the simple, ordinary life she had lost. But she was not that person anymore. She had been forged into something new in the fire of this life. I'm not going anywhere, she said. A slow, profound change came over his face. The hardness in his eyes softened, the rigid control in his shoulders eased. For the first time since she had met him, Dante Moretti looked not like a boss, not like a king, but simply like a man who had found something he thought he would never have again. Hope. He reached out his hand. She took it. His grip was warm, strong, and absolute. He did not pull her down to him. Instead, he held her hand, his thumb stroking the back of her wrist, right over the white gold bracelet. It was an acknowledgement, a pact. He could not stand. He could not kneel. But in that moment, by offering her his hand, by ceding a part of his solitary power to her, he bowed. They stood there for a long time, side by side, equals, watching the city they now ruled together.